First item we have is bill introduction. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce, it is RS 1181. It would be concerning post-secondary education related to the comprehensive grant program.
Without objection, we'll accept that. Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I do have a bill introduction request. It's RS 1481, and it's concerning the Kansas Municipal Judges Association, not a legislative topic for this committee, and they want to talk about fingerprinting with us.
Without objection, we'll accept that bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any others? Seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from March 1, 2, 3, and 6. Have a motion from Senator Alley. Have a second from Senator Fagg. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll have a hearing on HB 2290, authorizing the affiliation of Northwest Kansas Technical College and North Central Kansas Technical College with Fort Hays State University. We'll start out with an overview from the reviser, David Weiss, Office of Reviser. David, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. House Bill 2290 would authorize the affiliation of Northwest Kansas Technical College and North Central Kansas Technical College with Fort Hays State University. The institutions would be designated as Fort Hays State University-Northwest Technical College and Fort Hays State University-North Central Kansas Technical College, and would be governed by and operate as technical colleges within Fort Hays State University. The governing bodies of the technical colleges would shall become industry or regional advisory boards to the president of Fort Hays. For each such technical college, all the powers and duties established in the governing body of those technical colleges currently in law would be transferred to Fort Hays State University, subject to rules and regulations and supervision by the State Board of Regents. The president of Fort Hays would appoint members of the industry or regional advisory boards, and the members of the boards would represent industry sectors or regions that correspond to the programs offered by the technical colleges. The technical colleges shall offer programs approved by Fort Hays, including credential and degree programs that the technical colleges are authorized by law to award. The industry or regional advisory board shall review non-credit and credit programs with the president and senior leadership of Fort Hays State and the technical colleges to ensure such programs are aligned with current and emerging needs of industry and the community for an educated and trained workforce. The boards also have to provide input relating to changes in each advisory board's members' industry sector or region that affects academic programs, perform any operational responsibilities or duties specified in the affiliation agreement, and perform such other responsibilities as requested by the president of Fort Hays. The bill also provides that nothing in the bill would be construed as altering any admission requirements applicable to the respective educational institutions, and each affiliating institution shall continue to be subject to any applicable admission requirements imposed by law. Fort Hays State University shall not admit degree-seeking first-time freshmen or transfer students to university programs who do not meet applicable qualified admission standards. Further, the newly affiliated technical college shall continue to be technical colleges and shall be eligible for funding in the amounts that are currently available to technical colleges. The bill contains typical language clarifying the newly affiliated technical colleges are technical colleges referred to in statute, contracts, and other documents. No lawsuit or other judicial proceeding will abate because of the change. The formal affiliation agreement between the technical colleges and Fort Hays State University shall include provisions relating to the manner and terms upon which faculty, employees, and students may be transferred to the university. Such provisions shall specify terms of employment and other personnel matters. Subject to authorization by the State Board of Regents, all personnel of Northwest Kansas Technical College and North Central Kansas Technical College who are necessary to the operations of the newly affiliated technical colleges in accordance with the needs of Fort Hays State University may become personnel of the university. The employment of such personnel shall be deemed uninterrupted. The affiliation shall be effective upon approval of a formal affiliation agreement consistent with these provisions in the bill by the State Board of Regents and the governing bodies of the technical colleges on and after the date the Higher Learning Commission of the North Central Association of Colleges and Schools approves the affiliation. If only one of the governing bodies of the technical colleges provides approval of a formal affiliation agreement, the provisions of this section shall still be considered effective as to the affiliation between Fort Hays State and the technical college who approved the affiliation. Sections 2 through 5 just are conforming amendments to statutes concerning technical colleges to comply with what's in the new Section 1. The bill becomes effective upon publication in the statute book July 1st. The House made no amendments to House Bill 2290 and passed the bill 121-1 on March 2nd of 2023. And I can stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
David, this is similar to the Wichita State and Wichita Tech. Is it same language? Pretty
Yeah,
much?
I think it's modeled off of that Wichita affiliation, yes.
Thank you. Other questions? Senator Petty.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So they now, I mean, when and if this legislation passes, they will now be employees of Fort Hays State University. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yep.
And they will, and of course, it's going to change the name because it's going to add Fort Hays State to these as well.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to still be, have their own, I mean, they're going to be affiliated with the university, they're going to be employees of the university, but they're going to operate separately?
Well, I think they would operate kind of as they are now as technical colleges, except they would have that, the boards now that on the colleges would actually now just be sort of more advisory to the president and to the Fort Hays State University leadership. But they would, I mean, I think the technical colleges would continue to operate. It would look pretty much like the operation now, except they would have that Fort Hays State sort of oversight.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, David. We'll start out with the proponents. First, we'll have the president, Tisa Mason, Fort Hays State University. Tisa, welcome to committee.
I would like to clarify that it is our understanding that the presidents will become Fort Hays employees, but the rest of the employees will remain employees of their respective institutions. So with that, Chair Billinger and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this request to better serve our students, our businesses, and our communities through a voluntary affiliation model designed to closer align our three institutions as we explore educational delivery models. Joining me for the presentation today are two of my colleagues who will be appearing on WebEx, and we'll be going back and forth a little bit, so I know that we're set up for that. Together, Presidents Burks, Shears, and I have developed a shared vision from our already established strong common missions and focus on how we best provide opportunities for the communities that we serve. Our true North goals are and remain student, businesses, and community success. We do great work in meeting these goals, but we believe our current challenges call for new thinking. In fact, I'd like to compliment Presidents Burks and Shears for their foresight in pursuing this initiative to drive change. And I believe we'll be hearing from President Burks right now.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right, great. My name is Eric Burks. I'm the president at North Central Kansas Technical College. Good morning to the committee and to the chair. Billinger, thank you for your time this morning. Why now is a question, and I think it's valuable to point out that North Central Kansas Technical College has actually been in a looser affiliation with Fort Hays State University for maybe 13 or 14 years. And so during that time, we've had our students living on Fort Hays' campus through the Gateway program. They're able to access several of the services there. Our welding department is actually housed in one of their buildings on Fort Hays' campus. So this is just a deepening for us. And why the three of us are looking is because rural Kansas is under a significant demographic and economic pressure that requires innovative strategies like this. And we believe education plays an essential role in solving those. The population of the first congressional district declined by 1.6% in the last census, while at the same time, the overall state's population increased by 6%. So it's particularly, something of concern in our area of the state. The decline is also particularly acute in the number of young people who will be passing through our schools. Demographers are predicting that Kansas will see a 15% drop in college-going students by 2029. Rural populations are shrinking. The Center for Economic Development and Business Research are forecasting a 33% decline in rural populations in Kansas by 2064. This will only be made worse by the retirements, as the U.S. Census Bureau predicts nearly 25% of the state's population will be 60 or older by 2030. So for our communities to thrive, we've got to join forces. We've got to do something different. And every individual must have the ability to fully develop their talents, skills, and interests. We must forge stronger partnerships like this, and we must forge them also with business and industry to shape how programs develop and align with their needs, as well as create a more resilient talent pipeline. We also need to expand our role as higher education as contributors to the overall health and viability of our local communities. We feel that all three of us do this well already, but we feel that we can do it much better working together. And so that's why we're taking on this challenge and this partnership. And these are our three pillars upon which the framework of this affiliation is designed and how its success will ultimately be determined.
Fort Hays State always has and will continue to have a relentless focus on serving rural communities, and often in partnership with community colleges. Our collective work with transition to teaching, RN to BSN, speech pathology, and our Southwest Social Work Cohort program are just a couple of examples of how we invest in communities locally. We know that the demographic situation will only get worse, and there are not enough people to keep up with workforce and community needs. This proposed voluntary affiliation is firmly rooted in the Kansas Board of Regents strategic plan, offering affordability for families, strategic partnerships with businesses, and a promise of increased viability. And at this time, you'll hear from President Ben Shears.
Good morning, committee. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. I'm Ben Shears. I'm the president here at Northwest Kansas Technical College, located in Goodland. Thank you for the opportunity to provide remote testimony, and apologies for not being able to be there in person. This initiative is boldly focused on today's challenges. Affiliations and mergers in Kansas higher education are not new concepts, and as occurred often in the past, have involved significant legislative engagement in the process. In the late 1980s, as an example, there were nearly twice the number of technical schools, which was what they were known as that point, area vocational technical schools, in our state as there are today. Over the following three decades, from the 1980s till now, 5 area vocational technical schools moved into area community colleges. In December of 2006, in response to kind of the sense around the state that more was needed to be done to increase and support technical education, the Kansas Technical College and Vocational School Commission, which was made up of technical colleges, community colleges, Department of Commerce, and others, heard numerous proposals, including, notably, a recommendation at that time that the remaining technical schools or colleges merge or affiliate with community colleges or universities in the state. Ultimately, this commission did pave the way for the creation of the Technical Education Authority, more commonly known as the TEA. And by 2008, plans were finalized for the last of the technical schools or colleges to either merge with local community colleges or universities or seek independent accreditation. As of today, all but the existing 7 technical colleges, which is what we are today, have merged with nearby community colleges. Of those 7 that remain, 2 were recently merged or affiliated with the university. That'd be the Washburn University, Washburn Tech, and WSU Tech. Well, so what we're proposing is a natural progression of the process of integrating technical colleges and regional partners that's been going on literally in our state for decades. In fact, what we're proposing is happening in other states across the country as higher education institutions see and experience the value and efficiencies of greater alignment. The difference in recent years is that our institutions and a few before us are working to voluntarily, and I think that's a key piece to point out here, voluntarily affiliate to meet our goals, as opposed to the future likelihood of forced change through well-intended legislative involvement. As I have said once, and I have said often, we much prefer to be in the driver's seat than in the trunk. And I'll turn it back to Dr. Mason.
Thank you. For students, the voluntary affiliation increases access to program offerings at more locations, pathways to achieve educational goals, ranging from simple credit hours to a certificate through to a graduate degree, low tuition, seamless transfer, experiential learning opportunities, an expanded career network that allows students to make essential professional connections, and integrated professional advising to help students navigate an expanded range of choices and opportunities, ultimately leading to higher completion rates and that lead to jobs. Now I believe President Burks will be back with you.
That's right. For our employers, this affiliation helps address the workforce concerns by expanding or creating more experiential learning partnerships, giving employers the opportunity to, one, shape our programs and develop how they align with their needs, which could really expand what we currently do, because we could be able to offer from a CNA or a CDL, which is a very short-term program, all the way up to a doctorate degree. So a wide range for our businesses and to meet their need. To expand access to employee and professional and workforce development programs and services, ranging from training and consulting programs to continuing education opportunities. We want to engage with and create engagement with prospective employees in the workplace through micro internships, apprenticeships, and earn as you learn initiatives where everyone benefits from those arrangements. And we want to create a reliable employee pipeline across our 3 institutions to recruit and train employees who are work ready. Now I think it's to President Shears.
Indeed. So for our communities, the voluntary affiliation grows more prosperous businesses and communities, specifically by creating stronger educational institutions that better serve our essential roles as contributors to the overall health and viability of our local communities in the region. Expanding access to the expertise and services provided by established programs at the university, like the W.R. Robbins Banking Institute, Cybersecurity Institute, Technology Incubator, and the Kansas Small Business Development Center. Enhancing tactical initiatives that are coordinated across the 3 institutions to help bolster resources, plans, and the attraction of business to support local economic development efforts. And I'm going to pause for just a minute because I've always got a quick story, and this is one I think that really proves the benefit of this potential. One of the other hats I wear is I also serve on the Sherman County Community Development Board as the chair of that board. And so one of the conversations that I get to have frequently is companies that are looking to move into Western Kansas and into Sherman County. And so we got a call a couple weeks ago. It was the day after we announced that we were moving public with the conversations on the affiliation. And we had a company that was looking to initially set up shop in Denver, just outside of Denver. And as they began to explore Colorado, they said they really didn't like the political and regulatory environment in Colorado. So they wanted to come to Kansas, but they wanted to be someplace close to Denver. Well, folks, you don't get any closer to Denver in Kansas than Sherman County. And so that presented an opportunity for us for a conversation. And one of the things we talked about was the employment pipeline. And they were looking at what they're looking at right now is to bring in about 100 employees into our county, which is significant. 100 employees into a county our size is significant. That would make them one of the largest regional employers in our community. And so we started to talk about their workforce needs, and one of the things that they mentioned were some engineering-related opportunities for employees, which we can help address through our engineering program at the college. However, they had some other needs within that pipeline of the 100 employees that they had. And so, as we began to talk to them, one of the things I said is that, we can offer some help here at Northwest Tech to fulfill some of your needs, but I can do you one better. I said, just yesterday, we announced this affiliation with Fort Hays State and NCK Tech and Northwest Tech. I said, so one of the things we can do collectively is not only can I open up the employment pipeline for my institution, now we can open up employment pipeline and access into 2 other institutions within our region to help you address the needs that you're going to have for workforce development. And so I think that's a very tactical and practical example of one of the things that we have the ability to do now that maybe didn't exist quite so well in the past. So another thing we can do, of course, keeping graduates local so they can contribute to the vitality of their communities through careers they build, the goods and services they buy, and through their civic, social, and economic contributions that they'll make as a result of the educational opportunities we can provide. A lot of our students at the 2 technical colleges we call them wires and pliers kids, who are wanting the hands-on technical education, and they want to stay working in that field. But there are always a group of students who want to be able to transfer on and pursue and advance their education opportunities, and this will help pave that way and make that a lot easier. And the beauty for us is this: if we can get a 2-year student through a 2-year technical program at one of our institutions that's aligned with the university. So for example, construction that President Burks and myself both have at our institutions, get them into the construction management program in a seamless process with Fort Hays State University. The reality is this: the longer we can keep those students exposed to rural Western Kansas, the more likely we are to get them to stay in rural Western Kansas. And if anybody is familiar with anything happening in the housing, obviously not just in Western Kansas, but across our state, the more students that we can keep that are building houses, the better off we're all going to be. So some of those kinds of things I think are pretty exciting for us. I'll kind of wind down here on this side. Our rural communities are experiencing population and job loss, which was described earlier, which will continue on course unless we change the direction of what we're doing. The communities we serve need a different solution. If we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to get the same results, and which is continued population decline and businesses that have nobody to step in to take over when they close up shop. Or we can do something different and build stronger, sustainable outcomes. This initiative, I think, will forge stronger connections between our 3 institutions, current and future students, and with our communities, businesses, and industry in our area. And most importantly, acting now, the 3 of us are building our voluntary affiliation from positions of institutional strength, dramatically increasing our ability to deliver new and better solutions. None of our institutions are about to go under, which I think is significant to note. We're all strong and effective at what we do, which allows us to come to the table on equal footing and focus on what's important: jobs, students, and growing our rural communities. Do we think this is the silver bullet that's going to solve everything with rural population decline? No, but it's a significant and coordinated step in the right direction that I think moves us out of our local insulated silos and takes a more regional, coordinated process and approach at development. And my last comment, and then I will sit quiet. And this is, we have a new board member on our Northwest Tech board, and he's from Atwood, Kansas, and he just joined the board this last month. And one of the conversations we were having around this affiliation and development and population changes, he said, we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick in the number of kids we have in our K-12 school. And he was really excited about this. And I kind of knowing the answer, I said, what do you attribute that to? And he said, SurePoint Ag. And if you're not familiar with SurePoint Ag, they are a significant economic development effort that's going on there, a company located in Atwood that has grown and grown and is now partnered with John Deere, and all kinds of things happening. As that industry develops, that small rural community of Atwood continues to grow. And there's a significant piece that I think the 3 of us together can be able to do to start building business and industry within our broader service area and within our local communities to be able to address some of the needs that we see. And so we're excited about it. Our boards are excited about it, and really looking forward to seeing what this next phase kind of takes on. So we appreciate your support. And I'll turn it back to Dr. Mason.
This voluntary affiliation is not a merger. A merger would likely involve legally dissolving the partners' institutions and then transferring all of the assets and the liabilities to the lead institution. This voluntary affiliation involves the alignment of our operations, united institutional branding, and integrated academic programs. Under our affiliation, each institution will retain its own federal ID, independent accreditation, and all three presidents will remain in their roles. Funding streams will remain separate and intact, and they will not change as a result of our voluntary affiliation. The two technical college presidents will report to the Fort Hays presidents under the authority of the Kansas Board of Regents. We will unify our branding under the Fort Hays brand, and the NJCAA athletics will continue at Northwest Tech. Operationally, should the voluntary affiliation be approved and based on the needs of the communities we serve, we've identified a number of academic and administrative programs and service pilots by which we will test proof of concept and from which we will extract best practices before moving to full implementation. Furthermore, each implementation team will include stakeholders from businesses, communities, and across our institutions. Our first thought on academic pilots are on agriculture, construction, and nursing. Our first thoughts on administrative pilots will focus on admissions and marketing, advising for these three majors, general education and transfer processes, registrar functions, as we will need to create a simplified crosswalk among institutions for cross-institutional transcript exchange, procurement, and an IT study group to begin to think about data governance and to identify low-hanging fruit for operational alignment. While we have set up the basic structure, the campus communities, those closest to the work, will determine how to best meet these ends. Our process began with an idea and a conversation. It evolved by securing a grant and an outside consultant to help us through the process of creating a shared vision, a framework, and draft legislation. We then shared the concept and the documents with our campuses and boards. All three boards, Northwest Tech, NCK Tech, and the Kansas Board of Regents, voted unanimously in support of moving forward with a voluntary affiliation. Now, it must pass through the legislative process in the form of HB 2290. If signed into law, we will then seek authorization from our accrediting body, the Higher Learning Commission, which we've already started to engage in tentative conversations with, and finally, ratification by the governing boards of all three institutions. As this process unfolds over the next several months, we've invited input from our internal and our external constituents to share their ideas and suggestions into building this strong existing framework. Their feedback will be crucial to help shape the resulting arrangement into something that will serve our students and our communities well for years to come. Today, we respectfully ask you for your support. We appreciate your time, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have at the appropriate time.
Thank you, President Mason. Questions? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Doctor, for being here today. A couple of things that you said I wasn't aware of, the first one would be the boards actually then of each one of those other technical colleges will then become advisory boards and reporting to the board at Fort Hays State, if I'm correct.
The president of Fort Hays State, and I report to the Board of Regents.
Right.
That would be the
They would
flow.
report to you, the advisory boards, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. The second would be any financial decisions made. How will they be made if these are advisory boards?
I don't know that Ben and Eric, can you talk a little bit about the financial decisions that you're making now?
I believe, the financial decisions we're making now or how we expect it to go. I guess how we expect it to change to the future, and Sherry Utash is on here as well from WSU Tech, but we expect it to work much like it does there. And my understanding is that the president of the university approves the budgets, but the board and I, along with my CFO, would develop the budget. We would present that to our advisory board, and then we would recommend that budget onto the university president.
Thank you. And in a continuation of that questioning, the responsibility financial responsibility belongs to who, what?
Well, ultimately, obviously, it's going to end up on our shoulders, but we're going to work collectively together, and we're going to maintain those separate financial portfolios.
It would be, the decisions then would be made ultimately by yourself and Fort Hays State
Yes,
for the other two institutions.
right, with consultation, and
Right.
we work very well together. We're here to be the tide that lifts all boats. This is really important. This is it's about us working together.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you all three for presenting today. Appreciate it. Next, we'll have Cherie Utash on behalf of the Kansas Technical College on WebEx. Cherie, are you there?
I am. Hope you can hear me. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee members for allowing me to visit with you for a few minutes about this remotely today. I am Sherry Utash, and I'm the president of WSU Tech and the vice president of workforce development at Wichita State University. And today I'm here representing the Kansas Technical College Association, which is the presidents of all 7 technical colleges. So I'm here today to offer the support and endorsement of the Kansas Technical Colleges for House Bill 2290 that would allow the affiliation of 2 of our members, Northwest Tech and North Central Tech, to do this voluntary affiliation with Fort Hays State University. I have been through an affiliation as I worked through the affiliation with Wichita State to create what is now WSU Tech. And I can tell you firsthand that the partnerships and the benefits that our affiliation has brought to Kansas and to both of our institutions has been very, very rich and very good for our community. We've been able to improve and enhance synergies of co-enrollment, technical ed completion with job placement, and then continued higher education. As Dr. Mason mentioned, as we at WSU and WSU Tech have built laddering of career and education opportunities between our institutions. It's also been a huge strengthening of our workforce and economic development in our area. It's created a lot of collaboration and a lot of interinstitutional benefits, such as supplies, contractual services, and others. It is our belief as the Kansas Technical College Association that for institutions like we have here today that have voluntary led to develop a partnership like this, that's embodied in House Bill 2290, is in the best interest of Kansas to support and to foster their efforts. These institutions have given careful consideration to this. They have spent a couple of years working on it and thinking through it. And I really applaud the combination of regional needs, demographics, and economic development that they've put together in their decision making to bring House Bill 2290 to you. It is also worth noting that House Bill 2290 would have a negligible fiscal effect on the state general fund. In fact, I would anticipate that the proposed affiliation has the potential to create efficiencies and effectiveness in the long term if this affiliation is approved. So on behalf of the Kansas Technical Colleges, we would encourage you to support House Bill 2290 out of committee, and I would be happy to stand for any questions as appropriate.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, thank you, Cherie. Next, we'll have Blake Flanders, Board of Regents. Blake, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chair Billinger, members of the committee. I'm here on behalf of the Board of Regents to support 2290 and the affiliation between the 2 technical colleges and Fort Hays State University. And I think it's really a piece of a broader continuum and a broader conversation to better serve the workforce. You know, as I was thinking about how we connect our educational entities all the way from, you know, K-12 to community or technical colleges to higher ed, I thought back when I was a student at Goodland High School. There was a parking lot between, at the time, the vocational school and the high school. And there might as well have been a canyon there, because only about 2 or 3 students ever went, when they were in high school, ever went over to the vocational technical school. You were on one of 2 tracks. You were on a college track, or you were on a vocational track in high school, candidly. And those 2 tracks were totally different. And it was really thought about that if you were on the vocational track, you were going to go to a very short term, maybe a little bit of post-secondary education or some of that training. Maybe the training happened in shop class in high school, and you were going to go right into the workforce. And there were plenty of good jobs at that time to support that exact pathway. That wasn't the way it was across all the state. There were some vocational schools that were serving high school students, okay? We served about 3,000 to 3,500 across the entire state of high school students that actually went in to the technical schools at the time while they were juniors or seniors in high school, and the community colleges as well. What you did is you connected those with Senate Bill 155. We were at 3,500. You passed Senate Bill 155. And all of a sudden that connected, we're at 13,000 now. High school students who are accessing technical education while they're in high school, the state funding it, and they're going to a community college or a technical college in a technical area. You've already said it's okay for a community college district to come together. I believe that's Chapter 71, Article 13. Community colleges can merge or consolidate. And in Chapter 71-17, Article 17, you said it's okay for a technical school or college to merge or affiliate with a community college. You actually said consolidate with a community college, I think is the way the legislation reads. If those 2 things were happening, it wouldn't come before this body. You've already said you've got permission to do that. Where we need to come before you today is because a technical college is affiliating with a state university. That's where we need to bring these individually, and that's what we've done. So you've already given permission for technical colleges to go to community colleges. You've given permission for community colleges to consolidate with community college. So where did affiliation come from? Affiliation, in 2006, there was a Technical Education Commission. And one of the items in there was that all of the technical schools at that time who were governed by local school districts, some of them were governed by local school districts, out of that commission was a recommendation that they needed to either merge or affiliate with a post-secondary educational institution. There was one in Kansas City that did that with Kansas City Community College. And that affiliation then happened with the Kaw Area Technical School affiliated with Washburn University. Future forward, we had Wichita Area Technical College affiliate with WSU, Wichita State. And so as I look, I think the best predictor of future state, just look in the rearview mirror and say, what's happened with those 2? Well, when Kaw Area Technical School became Washburn Institute of Technology, they've almost doubled in enrollment since then. I think Dr. Utash could tell you, I think WSU Tech has increased by perhaps 1/3, okay? Serving more students, increasing the talent pipeline, because here's what's changed. Now, we need individuals that can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a technician, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a technician, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way through that continuum. If you're a welder, you can go all the way and you go through and get a baccalaureate degree and now you can supervise, you've got the keys to the city. We're going to see more students, first of all, not think that they were going to college. They'll go into a college program at a technical college. For the first time, maybe get excited about education and then decide to continue on. Not everyone, but many will make that choice now, and there'll be a clearer pathway for those students. So on behalf of the board, we hope you'll support this legislation, and we see it as a really good thing for our system.
Thank you, Blake. Questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Simon, for your presentation. When I'm looking through this, one question I have on like admissions, it talks in here about Fort Hays State University would not admit degree-seeking first-time freshmen or transfer students to university programs who do not meet the applicable qualified admission standards. So with what you just described there, if this guy comes along and he thinks, I do want to go to a four-year college, then he's got to go back to square one and start from basics and go here. How do you see those two going together?
So I'm trying to remember my academic affairs hat here. I believe if a student's had 24 credits of post-secondary education, then they can be automatically admitted into the university. So the qualified admission, the admissions requirements would still stay the same for each institution. In other words, Fort Hays comes under qualified admissions, and the technical colleges have open admission, okay? But if you went to that technical college and completed, I'm going to say just almost a year, then you could be admitted into the university. The same thing holds true now if you go to a community college as well. So if you didn't meet the admission standard for a university and you went to a community college and you completed that, I believe it's 24 credit hours, then you could be admitted.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it. Committee, I'd also point out we have written only from Mark Hess, Vice President of Hess Services in Hays, Kansas, Eric Stafford, Kansas Chamber, Mason Reuter, Mayor of the City of Hays, Sarah Wassinger, Hays Area Chamber of Commerce. Is there any other questions? Seeing none, we'll close our hearing on House Bill 2290. I forgot to mention also, was there anyone here as an opponent or a neutral? Seeing none, we'll close that hearing on HB 2290. Next, we'll have a hearing on Senate Bill 309, creating the Fixed Instant Revenue Shock for Taxpayers Fund and the Local Extraordinary Needs Fund, establishing the Joint Committee on Local Extraordinary Needs Grants and abolishing the Local Ad Valorem Tax Reduction Fund. And we'll have an overview by the reviser of statutes, David Weiss. David, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 309 would create the Fixing Instant Revenue Shock for Taxpayers Fund in the State Treasury. The fund would be administered by the State Treasurer. The purpose of the fund would be to restore to cities and counties local retailer sales tax or compensating use tax revenue that would be lost through the enactment of any legislation. The bill authorizes a transfer of $220 million from the State General Fund to the fund on July 1st of 2023. When legislation is enacted into law that would reduce a city or county's sales or compensating use tax revenue, the Director of Taxation would certify to the State Treasurer, the amount of such revenue that was collected in the 12-month period immediately prior to the effective date of the legislation, and then would compare that to the actual revenue collections for the 12-month period immediately following the effective date of the legislation, and then certify that amount to the State Treasurer. The State Treasurer would require the governing body of any of the city or county to certify that the body is in compliance with the revenue neutral rate statute, that's KSA 792988, prior to receiving any monies from the fund. Upon receipt of such certification, the Treasurer would pay from the fixing instant revenue shock for taxpayers fund to the appropriate city or county fund. The amount determined by the Director of Taxation to replace that lost local sales or use tax revenue. The bill also requires the state treasurer to establish procedures for any recapture of monies if it's later determined that the city or county is not complying with the revenue neutral rate provisions. Section 2 then creates the local extraordinary needs fund. This fund is also administered by the state treasurer. The purpose of the fund would be to provide grants to cities and counties for capital expenditure projects. This bill also transfers $50 million from the state general fund to the local extraordinary needs fund on July 1st, 2023. The treasurer would pay grants from the fund as approved by the Joint Committee on Local Extraordinary Needs Grants, which is, as we move to Section 3, which actually establishes this Joint Committee on Local Extraordinary Needs Grants. The committee would be a 10-member legislative committee, 5 members from the House appointed by the Speaker, and then 5 members of the Senate appointed by the President of the Senate. The state treasurer would forward all grant applications to the Joint Committee. The Joint Committee would review the applications, and they may adopt any procedural guidelines necessary to aid in reviewing those applications. The Joint Committee may approve the grants, except that they cannot approve any one single grant project in excess of $2 million. That would be the cap. Section 4 of Senate Bill 309 abolishes the local ad valorem tax reduction fund. And then the remaining sections of the bill would then amend and repeal statutes to eliminate references to the local ad valorem tax reduction fund due to the abolishment of the fund, and then makes other technical and conforming amendments to the statutes to accomplish that purpose. The bill becomes effective on publication of statute book July 1st of 23, and I can stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, David. Questions? Senator Petty.
David, so I kind of, and maybe this will be explained in testimony, but you, in new section 1, it mentions the $220 million from the state general fund to the fixed instant revenue shock for taxpayer fund. And then in new section 2, then it mentions the $50 million from the state general fund to the local extraordinary needs fund. So what's the difference between these two funds? I mean, there's a lot of money there, but.
Yeah, there's two transfers to two different funds. So it'd be if both these funds were enacted, it'd be a total of $270 million transferred, but there would be the $220 to the fixing instant revenue shock, and then the $50 million would be to the local extraordinary needs. So the $220 is that revenue replacement potential for the local cities or counties due to any legislation enactment. The $50 million is a separate grant. There's two tracks there where their monies are going. So.
Senator Petty.
So only the $50 million goes through the extraordinary needs grant committee, joint committee.
Correct. Yeah, that would be the committee is responsible for reviewing those local extraordinary need grants, and that would be the $50 million would be the joint committee's overview. Yeah.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, David. First, we'll start out with proponents. We have Senator Masterson. Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With permission, may I testify from here?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Thank you. And I'll be brief because I'm actually kind of anxious to see some of the intellectual contortions it's going to take for a local government to say they don't want to be held harmless. But this bill is incredibly simple, right? It establishes two funds, and the only fund, by the way, that would create an ongoing mechanism for local governance to be held harmless no matter what we do as a legislature, whether that's, I know, the big scary 248 or the governor's proposal on feminine hygiene and diapers, right? That's going to have a local effect. So this would create the mechanism in which they would have the ability to be completely held harmless from those losses. It does, candidly I admit it adds a little bit of a layer of accountability. I'm not even sure you could qualify it that way because it just says they certify they will comply with current law, with truth in taxation and revenue neutral, just to give a little bit of assurance. But it is truly that simple. It's also interesting to me that this whole extraordinary needs is really built for those rural, small communities, right? That came from a conversation from a small town mayor that, you know, they can only raise $28,000 with a single mill, and they're trying to replace a fire station. So it gives an opportunity for them to come, and that type of a need is something I think the state has some interest in, and it would give an opportunity for that also to be done. And then again, complying with revenue neutral laws, then they would be able to not affect the local property tax and fulfill that extraordinary need. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Petty.
And thank you, Mr. President, for that explanation. So the 220 million, you're saying that this is going to help assure that they're complying with state law. Do we have evidence that they're not complying with state law right now?
Not to my knowledge, you got, oh, sorry.
Senator Masterson.
Thank you. You got anecdotal stories, right? And so that's why I hesitate to even call it a measure of accountability, because they're simply certifying they're following current law, which I believe they are.
Senator Petty.
So, but actually it's another layer, even though they're following state law. This is another layer of us controlling funds?
Senator Masterson.
Simply a signature on the application of certification when they submit for the difference.
Senator Petty.
And then the new section 3 dealing with the 50 million. So this becomes arbitrary, a grant application, arbitrary decision by the legislature, which of course we already have that ability right now, but another arbitrary decision by the legislature that local units of government would have to apply for a grant. And I think, if I remember correctly, it can't be more than $2 million. And is this 50 million an annual amount, or is this a 50 million that's going to, one-time amount that's going to be put into this local extraordinary needs fund?
Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of answers there. I don't think arbitrary is probably the correct term, but it does create the mechanism. And the reason it was you go through a committee or to the legislature is because I would contend there's probably more than $50 million worth of projects going to be submitted. So it's a mechanism to prioritize, right? The fire station in a little town versus, I don't know, pick your thing. And the reason for a $2 million cap is you've experienced it. You can get some individuals in an influential enough position that you could consume the whole thing in one district, right? So that idea would be that they have to be spread around to other House and Senate districts. Because anytime you have a legislature involved, you have, interest in your own districts, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it would limit then what you could do in any given district and give a broader committee the ability to prioritize. The 50 million, though, is just, it's a transfer. And you're not, just like everything else we do, it's, we can't hamstring a future legislature. You can see that, but 50 million would let us get down the road, I would think, a few years. And then let the future legislature decide if the program's working or not.
Senator Petty.
Thank you for that explanation. And I would say there's over 1 billion of projects out there within our communities across the state. And so I don't know that 50 million would last more than a year, although there's now a 10-member group, the committee that's going to be making those decisions. And we already have a process in place through multiple pieces of legislation as it is to help with it, whether it's a one-on-one match or a variety of things. So it just seems that this is another layer of the legislature determining winners and losers.
Senator Masterson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, in response, just completely disagree with the premise, number one, and it feels like the same argument I think we're about to hear, that they'd rather have nothing than something, right? You said there's $1 billion in need, and so we don't even want to put 50 million towards it, is what I hear.
Senator Petty.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of nothing as something. I guess I would start with I mean, maybe the 50 million might be a new fund, but the 220 is just putting another layer on legislation that we passed just a couple of years ago when it comes to certification of their taxing processes at the local level. And as you just said, there's no indication that that's not being followed. Last year was or I guess actually this is the first year that we'll actually have everything in place. So, I mean, it just means that there's another layer here of saying, hey, we're watching, I mean, which we are, they've got state law, they're following state law. So, I mean, I have some real concerns about this. We have to have another layer of certification when every local unit of government has to do that with their own citizenry. And as you know, we put in place a process that they have to have hearings, they have to have certification of what the tax levy is for every taxing district. So I just, it is concerning that we're going to put another layer here in place that basically says you're not doing it, even though we know you are doing it, but hey, maybe you're not.
Senator Pittman.
Thanks for bringing this legislation for consideration. And I chatted with you a little bit before about some of my concerns on it, but I am wondering let's say we were to go forward with this and we had 220 million out there, is it only, it doesn't seem to say that it's only with the sales tax on food going away. It's not about the exemptions that we might put in this year or on the, it could be on any exemption, in my opinion, including maybe ag equipment exemptions, other kinds of exemptions that we had as a state have put in place that could qualify a local for that. Is that what you see in this?
Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that's absolutely correct. It's others that are making this all about 248. It is a mechanism to be meant ongoing, no matter what it is that we do in the future. If it has a direct effect on the local revenue, it would, through sales tax, it would apply. And that's why I use the example of the hygiene products and diapers, because that's a real thing being promoted right now by the current governor that will have an effect, and it would apply to that as well.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I see that when I think about it like that. It is kind of new to go ahead and give money to the locals, I think, but I think about whether that 220 million is actually enough if they are all certified. I do have a concern on the 2 million. You know, it seems like it would favor the smaller cities and counties out there versus the bigger ones. And then my third concern is the makeup of that board seems to be very, very one-party specific. So there's no mention of the minority party in that committee. It's 5 members appointed by the Senate President and 5 by the Speaker. And it would be awful nice if we were to go forward with this, to have the minority party represented as we traditionally do.
Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that's actually, and the reason it doesn't have to be specific in the bill is because we have rules that apply to that, so it would be proportional.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to is there any other proponents? Seeing none, we'll move on to opponents. We'll start out with Jay Hall, Kansas Association of Counties. Jay, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Jay Hall, the Deputy Director and General Counsel for the Kansas Association of Counties. This was an interesting process of putting together the position for the association on this particular bill, because I actually like the idea of this bill. I actually like the concept. I particularly like the extraordinary needs fund, and we appreciate bringing that proposal forward because I like the concepts that are in this particular bill. And yet I stand here before you as an opponent. And the reason that I'm an opponent is because, as has already been stated here today, we can't bind future legislatures. And that's where I really struggle with this, is because these funds that are put in place, and not so much with the Extraordinary Needs Fund, because we certainly understand that if that fund were to go away, then those are kind of one-time grants. And so that doesn't necessarily have a long-term effect on any particular county. The concern with the fixing instant, the first fund, the concern with that, though, is that if a county were to experience a large drop in their sales tax revenue, that drop is not a one-time drop. That is a continuous year-on-year drop in that revenue, which means that if they ever could not recoup those funds from the first fund, that would be a continuous loss at the local level that would have to be made up probably in property taxes, because unfortunately our local governments are funded primarily by property taxes. And so any loss in sales tax revenue would have to be made up in property tax revenue. And that's not something that our local governments are really wanting to do. And so while I like the concepts here, I'm very concerned that if we were to get into a fiscal crisis at some later time down the road, so not necessarily even with any of you still in the positions that you're in, because obviously we can make an agreement between all of us here today that we are going to fund these, that we are going to put the money into these funds to make sure that there is no instant shock for taxpayers. And we will continue to put that money into those funds. But there will come a day when you are no longer in those chairs that you're in today, where I am no longer speaking at this podium, where others will come and they will say, well, I didn't make this agreement. I didn't put these funds there. And frankly, we have a $500 million shortfall, and that $220 million that's sitting over there in that fund looks like it will really help the state fix that shortfall. And in that moment, local governments will have to do something, because those funds will no longer be there to take away that shock. That shock may have been delayed, but that shock will come at that point. And so that's really our concern at KAC. It's not that we don't like these ideas, it's that there is no mechanism, and there really isn't a legislative mechanism to make sure that that funding is always there. And because of that, that's why we stand opposed, even though we like the concepts. And I'd be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Jay. Questions? Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jay. So if I'm hearing this right, it feels a little bit overtly political, but if it weren't for the existence of 248, right, if we were just talking about the feminine hygiene or other things, that you would be a proponent of the bill?
No, I'm not saying with any particular bill. It's, let's say that there's another bill later on that would impact sales tax revenue. So not 248. Let's set that aside, because I mean 248 is not law at this moment right now. So I'm not going to assume that it will become law or that it won't become law. But setting aside 248, let's say some other bill later on is going to impact sales tax revenue, not even for every county. Let's say that there's a particular region of the state that would see a great impact on their sales tax. And as a result of that impact, one county would lose $1 million of sales tax revenue. If the first fund exists, obviously they recoup that $1 million. But let's say that 3 years after that impact happens, the first fund is disbanded or eliminated through legislative action. They're still short $1 million. Like in that year, they would still be short $1 million. And at that point, they would have to fill that gap, likely with property taxes, in order to make themselves whole. So they would be in great shape as long as the funding was there. But if that funding ever ended, that's when the problem would come.
But in your own scenario there, without the first fund, they're just out the $1 million from the very beginning and in perpetuity. There's no mechanism even for a sliding glide path of some sort, right? I would contend that the way this testimony's come across to me, we really should have no mechanisms in law, the LAVTR, city county highway funds, any of it, because we're just subject to that legislature for that biennium. So we'll just leave it to them. If we do something, we do something. If we don't, we don't, because then you're continued just never would have any mechanism in the law that would even give that starting point.
No, and I agree with you that there are definitely there's always the concern from the Association of Counties that something could happen during the legislative session that would impact county revenues, either from a property tax or a sales tax point of view. So we always have that concern. And like I said, I like the concepts of this. I particularly like the Extraordinary Needs Fund because I do think that that would help, especially some of our smaller communities, address some of those needs. My concern is just, how do you make your bond payments if you thought you were going to get that $1 million and you don't?
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Masterson.
so again, you're looking back, there's nothing that hamstrings that $1 million effect of that. Well, shoot, I'm going to contend the feminine needs deal is going to have a note larger than that, particularly statewide. And you're just saying, no, we want no mechanism in order for that to hold us harmless. It just feels like, it feels circular in some nature, but I'm failing to understand how just even having the mechanism in place, whether it even is funded 10 years from now or whatever, it sees for now, it holds everybody harmless for whatever happens.
Certainly for this year. And as I said, I'm not necessarily even concerned about this year because the bill says that you would fund it, or next year or things like that. What I'm concerned about is when you and I aren't having this conversation, because you and I can agree right now because we're sitting here, we're talking to each other about that. But when you and I aren't here anymore to agree on that, then what? And the then what is where, because for future planning for our counties, the then what is the catch?
Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we may be just passing in the night. I don't know. It's kind of like the old saying, the bird in the hand versus two in the bush. This is the bird in the hand. This is telling you right now, no matter what happens, you're going to get at a minimum a glide path to adjust to whatever changes the state makes. So it's like, but it seems like you're taking a very high risk that in my mind is not in the best interest of your members, but we'll let it stand. Thank you, Jay.
I guess I would just say if I have that, if that bird in hand is my dinner, then certainly I want to eat dinner today, but I'm going to need another bird tomorrow.
Any other questions? Senator Pittman.
I think you both bring up some good points, and I can see the disconnect there, but would you say that if here's this pot of money that's not there now, to the President's point, and the counties can get it, I suppose, are you trying to tell us that the danger is that the legislature might assume that the locals will be held harmless and do future tax cuts, and then that money might not be there? I mean, is that the kind of thing that you're talking about? Because if we do the tax cuts on something, the money's not there now. And if we have the money, then there's a glide path, presumably, if we're going to pass this thing. But are you worried that in the future, there's no constant mechanism that would, so that we're more tempted to do these tax cuts, and then there's no guarantee that the locals will be held harmless? Is that kind of where you're going with that?
There is that potential, and that is the concern, is that there's no continuous nature of this. If this were continuous, I would likely be a proponent of it. But because there's no ability to bind future legislatures to ensure that those funds remain there, that's where I really have the concern.
Isn't it just that we might do the tax cut in the future and use this as a buffer and assume that we're just going to have these cuts, and then you wouldn't have that constant, is I guess what you're saying? Or are you just saying we want it to be constant? If we put the money in there, we want to have it year over year?
I think it's a little bit of both. We want it to be constant, and then I don't want to speak to the mind of the legislature as far as whether you would be more or less inclined to do tax cuts, because I don't know that I'm in the position to speak to that, but I do think not having it there on a constant basis is a concern, just from a planning and budgeting standpoint.
Other questions? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Jay. One of the concerns that I have is the net, the revenue neutral rate. How many of your counties maintained that revenue neutral rate, and how many of them didn't?
Off the top of my head, I honestly couldn't tell you how many maintained a revenue neutral rate. I know that some did, certainly, but I couldn't tell you the number off the top of my head.
My county asked that if we did this policy, they think that would go up, their property tax would go up 8%. But at the same voice, they have said your appraisals are going up 16 to 20%. How is this responsible by the counties?
Well, I would note that simply because your appraisal went up doesn't mean that necessarily your property tax will go up. I mean, it certainly could. But for instance, here in Shawnee County, I don't have the full numbers in front of me, so I'm just speaking hypothetically. Let's say that the average appraisal in the county went up 9%. If your appraisal went up 5%, you'll likely pay less next year. If you're, on the other hand, if your appraisal went up 12%, you'll likely pay a little bit more because the average was 9. So if you're below that average, you'll pay a little bit less. If you're above, you'll obviously pay more. And so appraisals going up doesn't necessarily mean that your property taxes will follow.
One of the reasons I think, thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the reasons I think that this bill is even being proposed is to protect our citizens from the increase in property taxes and in taxes in general. And by reducing the food sales tax, it's going to cost 1 to 2%. But yet we look on the other, and hear from the other side of the aisle, not aisle, the other people, the homeowners, they can't afford their property taxes. So I think there's a concern is the property tax increase. And what Senator Masterson has offered here is their way to hold that, so hold our counties at least neutral. And I think overall.
No, and that's why I say I like the concept of this, because I think that this is a great idea to do that. It's a question of, is this an idea that lasts for a few years? And if you're a county that uses your sales tax, for example, to pay on a 20-year bond.
And how many times has my property tax went up in the last 15 years?
Yeah.
That's what they're asking us.
No, I certainly understand that.
Any other questions? Jay, I might ask one. So if this sales tax on groceries goes away, is there anything keeping the counties from reintroducing or having another vote? Or do they have to have another vote to put a tax on or to adjust that local tax? How does that work?
So at the county level, in order to enact a countywide sales tax, county would have to come to the legislature for approval. So if they were to want to increase their property tax, or their sales taxes, I'm sorry, if they wanted to increase sales taxes by 0.25% to make up that difference in what is lost from grocery taxes, they would have to come to the legislature and ask to put on the ballot a new initiative to increase the sales tax by whatever percentage they determined.
So if you polled your counties, do most counties want a continuous sales tax on food?
Most counties do, simply because their percentages that they receive often go to pay for specific services. We have in the county what's called general sales taxes, and we also have dedicated sales taxes. So the dedicated sales taxes pay for a specific thing. For example, in some counties, the dedicated sales tax goes to fund their EMS, or it goes to fund emergency communications. If you take away a portion of that, then that sales tax obviously reduces, and more money has to come out of the county general fund to fund whatever that item happens to be.
So if the food sales tax, if the bill passed and food sales tax went to 0 and there was no local sales tax on that portion, they already are authorized to collect the tax. So you're saying they would have to come back to the state to get additional tax on the groceries?
No, not to get an additional tax on groceries. If the food sales tax were lost and a county lost, let's say 10% of their sales tax revenue, it was reduced by 10% as a result of the change in law. If they wanted to make up that change by increasing their sales tax on other goods, they would have to come back to the legislature because they cannot just increase that on their own. They would have to come back to the legislature to get authorization to put it on the ballot to increase the countywide sales tax.
So why are the counties not pushing to keep the sales tax like it currently is? Because currently we've dropped 2 cents off, we're at 4 cents. Okay, so why wouldn't you want to continue the sales tax on food as it is today?
Well, the difference between last year's bill and what's being proposed in Senate Bill 248 is that last year's bill, and I can't remember the bill number, did not impact the local portion. So local sales taxes remained constant. And so because local sales taxes remained constant, those dedicated sales taxes that I just mentioned were not impacted by this. There was no loss in revenue at the local level. The difference with Senate Bill 248 is that it impacts the local portion of the sales tax. And so now food would not be taxed at all at the local level, which means that depending on how much of your local portion of sales tax is made up of food sales, you could see anywhere from a 10 to 40% decrease in your local sales tax revenues.
So for the last several years where food sales tax has been kind of at the top of the billboard, you guys were thinking that zero sales tax meant zero except keep the local?
Well, what we were told and the way the bills were written, it exempted the local portion. It only impacted the state portion. And I mentioned in my testimony last year on those bills that we were fine with going to zero for the state portion because it left the local portion intact. We would have had a different position had that addressed the local portion.
So zero is really not zero.
Zero is not zero, and that was one of the things that we encouraged our counties to make sure that they communicated to their constituents, is that the bills that were in front of the legislature were not a complete zero because the local portion was not impacted by those.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jay. Next, we'll have James Kroll, Shawnee County Commissioner. James, are you here? Oh, sorry, I didn't have written on him, so. Okay, we'll put James as written only. Next, we'll have Jim Howell, Sedgwick County Commissioner on WebEx. Jim, are you there?
Yes, sir, I sure am. Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, welcome committee.
All right, thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I have provided a written testimony. I have 3 reasons I'd like to point out that I am opposed to this. And first of all, let me just say I'm very uncomfortable being opposite the President of the Senate. I appreciate his heart to provide this legislation. And by the way, this is intimately connected with Senate Bill 248, so I really can't talk about 309 without mentioning 248. And 248 obviously is the reason why 309 exists. This is under the premise that 248 has passed and there's no more local revenue on food sales to local government. First thing I'd like to point out, on the backside of my testimony, you'll see there's a chart. And on that chart, it shows the sales tax revenue to Sedgwick County from, I have 3 lines on there. There's 2 axes on the y-axis. The left axis is for the total sales tax on from Sedgwick to Sedgwick County. Right now, we receive about $38 million from sales tax, and this was approved in 1985, primarily for infrastructure and for reducing property tax. As a consequence of that sales tax, we're about 6 mils lower today than we would be had that not passed in 1985. We receive about 15% of our revenue from food. Out of that $38 million, 15%, or about $6 million, actually $5.7 million of that would come from food. So that's approximately 1 mil of property tax alone would come from food. So the point I would make with this chart is the sales tax is not a flat number. It is dynamic, and it changes as the economy changes. Generally has gone up over time. In fact, we've had a 2.2% increase over the last 10 years. In the last 2 years alone, we've seen an $8 million increase in sales tax to Sedgwick County. Now, the second thing I'd like to point out is this $220 million that's earmarked for this provision is really only going to cover probably 1 year. I see there's no actual fiscal note on local revenue impact, but my own calculations tells me it's at least 120 million, and I've heard other people say it's as high as $180 million. And it's not clear exactly what the impact is to local government, but I can tell you that our choices are going to be, again, without the passage of 309, our options would be, of course, reductions in services or property tax increase to cover the costs. So to President Masterson's point, I agree that 309 is actually a step in the right direction if 248 passes it in its current form. I would much rather see 248 adjusted so that we don't have the impact at all. I'd rather see this $220 million invested on infrastructure across our state. But to the extent that 248 passes in the current form, the $220 million is certainly welcome. However, it's not going to take care of the dynamic growth in sales tax. And finally, I would just point out that the sales tax was voter approved. When the voters were asked whether they wanted this to be approved or not, they knew this would be for property tax reduction. I've already mentioned we had about a 1 mil reduction from food alone. Wichita, it's estimated, would lose about $11 million. That's about 3 mils to Wichita. And I think there's other communities that would have a bigger impact than that. So again, to the extent that 248 passes in its current form, then 309 is certainly needed. I think we would all agree that 248 would like to see us become more like the states like Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Louisiana, North Carolina, and South Carolina that allow local governments to collect sales tax on food. Let me also point out that SNAP benefits or food stamp, we call them food stamps, those are already not taxed. So in terms of the low-income population of our state, if they're using SNAP benefits, they're not being taxed for food right now. I would also say that to the chairman's point, I would agree that most local governments across our state, in fact, I testified as an opponent to 248. We had one proponent who actually said he disagrees, he actually probably agrees with the opponents on local sales tax. And we had so many opponents on 248 from local government that frankly, I would be surprised if they don't want to adjust that piece back out. There is a huge impact to local government. Let me just say this. I answer to the voters, as you do as well. If the voters want me to change this, we can change it here. We don't need the state to step in. I would ask you to allow us to be elected officials and answer to the people that put us in these seats. They have spoken. If we want to make this adjustment, like 248, like 248 is currently written, we can certainly make that change here locally. If 248 does pass, I do appreciate 309. I would actually become a proponent of 309. However, I would ask for some adjustments for dynamic growth in sales tax to local government. Otherwise, you're going to flatten out our revenues, and over time, the revenues will be borne by property tax. That, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. With you being one of the larger areas in Kansas, do you guys analyze your pull factor? Have you ever heard that statement?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Mr. Chairman.
You have it?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for that question. We estimate between 30 to 45% of our revenue on sales tax comes from outside the Sedgwick County area. So we draw well beyond our borders. That brings that in. And by the way, our sales tax our revenue is shared amongst all 20 cities of Sedgwick County. Right now we keep about 38 million of the 135 million generated, and we share the rest of that with all the other 20 cities. And so, for example, I mentioned that Wichita will lose $11 million on the food portion of sales tax. Our sales tax collection impacts all 20 cities.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you ever been around any numbers that shows any kind of state pull factor? One of the scenarios to me is the best kind of tax is somebody else pays. So when we start tinkering with this stuff, how many out-of-state people pay this tax today?
I apologize. I can't hear on the microphone. I think it's turned off.
Because I didn't have a microphone on, Jim. That's
Sorry.
why. Okay. I'll start over here. Have you ever been around any kind of state pull factors? And what I mean by that is I kind of like a tax somebody else pays. And my question is, how many people out of state pay sales tax when they go through here? And I just wondered if you'd seen that on the Wichita level or anything.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for the question. I don't have that data in front of me, but we anecdotally know, we've talked about this forever, and we know it's at least 30%. It could be much higher. So again, Wichita draws people outside of Wichita. Sedgwick County draws people from outside Sedgwick County. They do all their shopping here. People passing through, they spend a lot of money in Wichita. And so we know the pull factor is fairly high. It's at least 30%.
Senator Fagg. Oh, okay. Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Jim. Hey, so, yeah, here's what I'm struggling to understand with all these lines of thought. It's the whole, when we were using the whole bird in hand, two in the bush. This would contend that because I'm not guaranteed a bird in the bush tomorrow, I do not want my bird today. And you're rejecting everything. And it feels to me, and I understand you have some fear, I guess, of the 248, but it looks to me like you're willing to take a risk that's not just yours, it's your voters, in creating a potential greater harm in order to risk taking a political defeat of a political position. Is that not an accurate way to describe that?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for the question. Again, let me go back to what I said a minute ago. If 248 was to pass in its current form, we would actually appreciate the provisions in 309. Our position really is that 248 is unnecessary to take that revenue away from local government, and we think that 309 is going to be a provision that holds harmless local government. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite hold us harmless. It is a step in the right direction. It provides some revenue. And by the way, let me ask one question with my answer, and that is the words comply with the revenue neutral rate. That's only for the extraordinary needs fund, I understand. But the word comply is also not defined in terms of if I exceed the revenue neutral rate, does that mean I'm not qualified for extraordinary needs, or does that mean does that issue of compliance apply to both provisions of the sales tax supplement versus and the extraordinary needs fund? So I think there's some clarity issues in the bill that need to be defined further. But President, to your point, if 248 passes in the current form, I think 309 is a step in the right direction. It does not hold us harmless, however.
Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, just the certification that you're following the law applies to both funds for clarity, and it's explicit in the bill. Two, I will just simply disagree, doesn't hold harmless, and potentially with the dynamic aspects of sales tax could more than hold harmless, could actually increase because it certifies what you would have lost in revenue. And when I sat on a city commission, we were pretty conservative in how we estimated sales tax. And we might in actuals collect more than we estimated. Well, my budget was based on my estimate, and I over collected. And so my memory serves, we would over collect 10, 15% at times. And what this would do would allow you to collect what was actually not collected, right? And so you could potentially increase what you had available to you, and you'd still have that excess collection to increase your spending or whatever you want to do. So just, it seems to me that other than being just overtly political on this deal, the proper position for all these local government associations would be to support 309 and continue to fight 248. So it's just, it's clear to me that it's overtly political.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, again, if we have a declining economy, again, under the current climate, I don't know that I would expect the economy to continue to grow. We might see a recession here, and I think under that terms, you are absolutely correct. And to circle back to the term of compliance, I don't know that it's clear when I say the word comply, whether that means if I exceed the revenue neutral rate, does it mean I did not comply with the provisions of the Senate Bill 13? Or does it mean if I have public hearings and I publish it in the newspaper and we vote to exceed the revenue neutral rate, that I have also complied with Senate Bill 13?
Senator Masterson.
The latter. If you comply, all it says is I certify comply with KSAA, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jim. Next, we'll have Tim Danberg, City of Olathe. Tim, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator Fagg, to your point, in Olathe, Kansas, it is 30% on the pull factor, and I think that's one of the reasons that we support the use of sales tax, because those who don't live in Olathe are using our roads and enjoying our services and feel it's appropriate that they pay as well. Our opposition to this bill is certainly not in the intent of of helping cities, especially those in challenging times. You know, we certainly support that intent. Ours is different in terms of the stability of our revenue source. When we build a fire station, that's a one-time cost, say $1 million. Then we're adding 10 firefighters at an ongoing cost that we have to commit to ongoing payment for. When we replace what is a stable form of revenue, say sales tax, and the state takes that, and the state says, we're going to take that, but we are going to make you whole with a fund that may be adequate, and you may get money or you may not, and takes away that certainty of a qualified funding source. And unfortunately, it has been our experience over the years is when the well-intended efforts by the legislature have meant to do that and replace a funding source, such as when the M&E tax was reduced, and a dear friend of mine, Arlen Siegfried, introduced the famous Siegfried slider. That's not something that we have learned that should be counted on to fund an ongoing revenue challenge, because that was funded for 2 years. I'm sure you'll hear about LAVTR and the intent for that. In essence, what happens is we're replacing a funding source, a stable funding source, whatever that may be, but say sales tax, that we count on to budget and fund the ongoing operational, not capital costs, the operational costs of local government and the people involved. That stability is very important to us. I mean, if we do bring in, say, a new fire station, or we add a street crew or a crew to the parks and intend to provide this level of service, knowing, hey, enjoy this job for a year, but we're really not sure what the legislature is going to do, and we're not sure through this process if there is any certainty that we will have anything that resembles the certainty of a source such as a sales tax to pay. So that is, our opposition is based on that fundamental shift where we have a revenue source, but say that the legislature takes action, takes that revenue source away, then our process is to come to the state and say, can we reach into this pot of money through that process that we may or may not get, that we are counting on? And I also say it's almost a philosophical shift. If you do have a funding source, a stable local funding source, the legislature may see that again as an opportunity that, well, if I take that, I can fix it with this thing that we have done in the past with LAVTR, among a number of other things, and then it evaporates, and that leaves us in a difficult position on how do we philosophically fund that operational gap that we are now facing. Our opposition is based on that. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate you being here today. Next, we'll have Mike Taylor, Kansas County Commissioner Association. Mike, welcome committee.
Thank you very much. I know we're running long, so I'll kind of cut down my testimony. But one point I wanted to make is many communities, including KCK, that where I live, have used that sales tax to fund bonds that have been issued to build grocery stores or community centers. If you take that stream away, I think a number of cities will default on those bonds. So I just want to make that point. Okay, so why are we opposing this? I'll just be blunt. We don't trust you. We don't trust you. Here's a short history lesson. In 2003, the legislature breached a decades-long contract with cities and counties for revenue from sales taxes, but then they eliminated the ad valorem tax reduction fund. The legislature then eliminated the machinery and equipment tax and promised to refund that money. It didn't happen. The mortgage revenue fund was taken away, which cost some counties millions of dollars. It was never refunded or made whole. So based on the track record, it's hard to trust you all. You know, and I'll just wrap it up quickly. For local governments, what we've been promised over the years is a big, thick, juicy steak and a fully loaded baked potato. And what you've given us is a skinny, dry hamburger and cold French fries. Thanks.
Questions for Mike? Seeing none. Thank you for being here today, Mike. Committee, I'd point out we have written only from Dr. Julia Ann Mazanek, President of Washburn University, Randy Lease, Kansas Legislative Policy Group, Michael Koss, City of Overland Park, Matthew Allen, City of Garden City. We have a neutral from Nathan Eberline, League of Kansas Municipalities. Are there any other opponents here today? You're a neutral, okay. Nathan, welcome committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As mentioned, my name is Nathan Eberline. This is my first time back in 5 years, and it's nice to see some familiar faces. We are neutral for many of the reasons that have been discussed. Going back to President Masterson's comments, we are in a similar position. We are concerned over property taxes, and we do want to ensure that we are protecting them for our communities, for our citizens. That remains a goal. I'll draw upon Mr. Taylor's point. I may have been gone for a while, but it is not so much that this is a political issue, but it is a historical issue. And for as long as I've been a part of these discussions, there's a concern about follow through. We remain concerned about Senate Bill 248, but we will always be happy to come to the table when it figures out how we can be partners together between the state and local entities. Whether it is the cities, the counties, or the state, we are all working to make Kansas be the best that it can be, to provide for our citizens. This is the first time in quite a while that we have had outreach on the state's part, and we are grateful for that. It does not allay the concerns we have over Senate Bill 248, but we are eager to continue the discussions, and anything that we can do to be a part of that, we look forward to chatting. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and thank you for your time.
Questions for Nathan? Seeing none, Nathan, thank you for being here today. Was there anyone else here that wasn't on the list that wanted to testify? Seeing none, we will close our hearing on Senate Bill 309. Committee, next we'll have a hearing on Senate Bill 295, authorizing the continuation of the 20 mil statewide property tax levy for schools. We'll start out with a reviser of statutes, David Weiss. David? I know he left. Yeah, she told me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that's good afternoon, committee. Senate Bill 295 authorizes the continuation of the 20 mil statewide property tax levy for schools. This would extend it out for an additional 2 school years through school year 2024, 2025. Under current law, the tax levy expires at the end of the current school year, 2022, 2023. The bill becomes effective upon publication of the statute book, and I can stand for any questions.
Any questions for David? Seeing none, thank you, David. Committee, we had a proponent, Timothy Grand, with the Kansas National Education Association, and we're going to make his written only. He had a prior commitment. We ran over on time. Opponents, we have written only, Michael Austin, Americans for Prosperity. And neutrals, we have none. Is there anyone in the audience that was wanting to speak to Senate Bill 295? Seeing none. Committee, does anyone have any comments on this, or Senator Pittman?
I hope we can pass this bill out. I think that 20 mils across the state is a fundamental aspect of our education system.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll close our hearing on Senate Bill 295. And with that, I apologize for keeping everyone long today, but we are adjourned.